Marcus Chen sat on his porch watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. 20 years had passed since his wife died in that car accident, and 15 years since his 3 children vanished without a trace. The police had given up long ago, but Marcus never stopped believing they were alive somewhere out there. The morning air carried an unusual warmth as he sipped his coffee. Then he heard it, a sound like thunder rolling across the clear sky. Marcus looked up and nearly dropped his mug. 3 massive shapes descended from the clouds, their wings spanning wider than any airplane he'd ever seen. Dragons. Real dragons. His heart hammered as the creatures landed in his wheat field, their powerful bodies crushing the golden stalks. The largest dragon, covered in midnight black scales that shimmered with purple highlights, approached first. Its eyes were ancient and intelligent, filled with an emotion Marcus couldn't identify. Then something impossible happened. The dragon's form began to shift and blur, scales melting away like morning mist. Where the massive beast had stood, a young woman now knelt in the trampled wheat. She had long black hair and the same green eyes Marcus saw in the mirror every morning. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Marcus felt his world tilt. The woman's face was older, but he knew those features. "Sarah?" She ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Behind her, the other 2 dragons were transforming as well. A tall young man with Marcus's stubborn jawline and a smaller woman with their mother's gentle smile. His children, all of them alive and somehow changed into something beyond human understanding. Michael, Emma, Marcus's voice cracked as they surrounded him, pulling him into an embrace that felt like coming back to life. "We never forgot you, Dad," Michael said, his voice deeper than Marcus remembered. "We've been trying to find our way home for so long." Emma, his youngest, looked exactly as she had at 16, though her eyes held wisdom that seemed centuries old. "We have so much to tell you, Dad. So much has happened." As they sat together on the porch, Sarah began their story. 15 years ago, they had been camping in the mountains when strange lights appeared in the sky. Before they could run, a beam of energy had lifted them into a massive ship. They woke up on a world called Drakmor, a planet where humans were considered nothing more than primitive animals. "The beings who took us looked like tall, gray creatures with large, black eyes," Sarah explained. "They called themselves the Zephyrians. They were conducting experiments trying to understand human genetics." Marcus felt anger building in his chest. His children had been taken by aliens and experimented on like lab rats. Michael continued the story. The Zephyrians had captured humans from all over Earth, but something went wrong with their experiments. Instead of just studying us, they accidentally activated something in our DNA, something ancient and powerful. "We started changing," Emma said softly. "At first it was just small things. We were stronger, faster, could heal from injuries that should have killed us. Then we began to transform completely. The transformation had been painful and frightening. One by one, Marcus's children had gained the ability to shift between human and dragon forms. The Zephyrians had been fascinated and terrified. Dragons were creatures of legend even on their advanced world, beings of such power that entire civilizations had fallen before them. "We weren't the only ones," Sarah said. "There were dozens of other humans who transformed. We formed a group, a family of sorts. We called ourselves the Earthborn. For years they had lived as prisoners on Drakmor, studied and tested by the Zephyrians. But dragons, even newly made ones, were not meant to be caged. The Earthborn had grown stronger, learning to use their new abilities. They discovered they could communicate telepathically with each other, share knowledge and power across vast distances. "We learned their technology, Dad," Michael said with pride. "Turns out human minds are incredibly adaptable. We figured out their computers, their ships, their weapons. Everything they thought made them superior to us. The escape had taken 5 years to plan. The Earthborn had worked together, using their combined knowledge to sabotage the Zephyrian research facility. When the moment came, they had transformed simultaneously, their dragon forms breaking free from containment. The battle was fierce, Emma remembered. But dragons are creatures of pure elemental power. We could breathe fire, manipulate energy, move through space itself. The Zephyrians had never faced anything like us. They had stolen several Zephyrian ships and fled into deep space. For the past 5 years, they had been traveling from world to world, learning about the galaxy and searching for a way home to Earth. They had discovered that humans were not alone in being taken by the Zephyrians. Dozens of species across the galaxy had been abducted and experimented on. We became something like galactic liberators, Sarah explained. Wherever we found Zephyrian facilities, we freed the prisoners and shared our knowledge. Other species began to see humans as powerful allies instead of primitive creatures. Marcus listened to their incredible story, feeling a mixture of pride and worry. His children had become something amazing, but they had also become targets. The Zephyrians would not give up easily on such valuable specimens. "Are you safe here?" he asked. "Will they come looking for you?" The three siblings exchanged glances. "We don't know, Dad," Sarah admitted. "We've been careful, using our dragon abilities to mask our presence. But the Zephyrians have technology we're still learning about." Michael stood up, his form flickering slightly as scales appeared along his arms before disappearing again. "What we do know is that we're not helpless anymore. We've learned to fight to use our powers, and we're not alone." As if summoned by his words, the sky began to fill with more shapes. Dragons of every color imaginable descended from the clouds, landing in the fields around Marcus's farm. Dozens of them, all transforming into human shapes. Men and women of various ages, all with the same look of ancient power in their eyes. "The Earthborn," Emma explained. "Our family. They followed us home." Marcus looked out at the growing crowd of dragon humans gathering on his property. These were all people who had been taken from Earth, transformed against their will, but who had found strength in each other. They had become something new, something powerful. But even as wonder filled his heart at this reunion, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. High above the gathering dragons, almost invisible against the blue sky, small metallic objects moved in precise formations. The Zephyrians had found them. The metallic objects in the sky moved with mechanical precision, their surfaces reflecting the morning sunlight like mirrors. Marcus squinted upward, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. They looked like small silver discs, no bigger than dinner plates, but something about their movement patterns made his skin crawl. Sarah noticed his gaze and followed it skyward. Her expression immediately hardened, and Marcus saw scales ripple across her neck before she controlled herself. "Surveillance drones," she said quietly, her voice carrying to the other Earthborn through some invisible connection. The reaction was immediate. Every transformed human in the field tensed, their eyes scanning the sky. Marcus watched in amazement as some of their human features began to shift slightly. Sharper teeth, elongated pupils, fingers that ended in barely visible claws. "How long have they been there?" asked a tall man with silver-streaked hair who had introduced himself as Dr. James Wright, a former NASA engineer. "Unknown," replied a woman whose dragon form had been deep emerald green. "We need to assume they've been tracking us since we entered Earth's atmosphere." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What does this mean? Are we in danger?" Michael placed a protective hand on his father's shoulder. "The Zephyrians don't give up easily, Dad. We've cost them too much to simply let us disappear." Emma's eyes were fixed on the drones, her expression calculating. "There are 12 of them in a standard reconnaissance pattern. They're staying just outside our immediate strike range, but close enough to monitor everything we do." The casual way his youngest daughter analyzed alien military tactics made Marcus realize just how much his children had changed. They weren't the same kids who had gone camping 15 years ago. They had become something harder, more dangerous. Dr. Wright stepped forward, his scientist's mind already working on the problem. "We need to know what they're capable of. Are they just watching, or are they weapons platforms?"
"Both," said a young woman who couldn't have been older than 25 when she was taken.
Zephyrian scout drones carry surveillance equipment and plasma charges. They can observe or eliminate targets depending on their programming. Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. These alien creatures had taken his children, experimented on them, and now they were threatening his family again. "What can we do?" Sarah's expression grew grim. "We need to move this conversation inside. The drones can probably hear everything we're saying." The group began moving toward Marcus's farmhouse, but it quickly became apparent that the building was nowhere near large enough for 43 people. The Earthborn seemed to realize this at the same time, and without any visible signal, most of them began transforming back into their dragon forms. Marcus watched in continued amazement as human bodies shifted and grew. Bones elongated, skin transformed into scales of every color imaginable, and wings unfurled with sounds like thunder. Within moments, his property was filled with magnificent dragons of all sizes and colors. The largest, a massive gold and bronze creature that had been Dr. Wright, lowered his great head toward the house. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant earthquakes, but Marcus could understand every word. The drones cannot penetrate dragon-scale telepathic communication. The Wright dragon explained. We can speak freely in this form. Marcus found himself standing among creatures that belonged in legends and myths, yet each one carried the soul of a human being who had been stolen from Earth. His anger at the Zephyrians grew stronger. Sarah, still in human form, translated for her father. They're saying the surveillance drones are definitely Zephyrian. The energy signatures match what we've seen before, but there's something different about these ones. Different how? Marcus asked. Emma's dragon form, smaller than the others but with scales that shifted between blue and silver like flowing water, spoke directly into Marcus's mind. The sensation was startling but not unpleasant, like hearing a voice through thick glass. These drones are newer models, Dad. More advanced. They're not just watching us, they're scanning us. Learning our capabilities, our numbers, our weaknesses. Michael's dragon form was jet black with veins of deep red running through his scales. They're preparing for something bigger. The Zephyrians don't send scouts unless they're planning an operation. Dr. Wright's massive form shifted, his bronze scales catching the sunlight. We've faced their military before. Standard Zephyrian tactics involve 3 phases: surveillance, isolation, and capture. They're currently in phase 1. Marcus felt a surge of determination. Then we need to stop them before they get to phase 2. The dragons around him exchanged what Marcus could only describe as surprised looks. Sarah laughed, a sound that was both human and decidedly dragon-like. Dad, you're talking about taking on an advanced alien military force with technology centuries ahead of anything on Earth. So? Marcus said, surprising himself with his own boldness. You're my children. These people are all someone's children, brothers, sisters, parents. They were taken from their families just like you were. If these Zephyrians think they can come to my world and threaten my family, they're about to learn why humans survived long enough to develop civilization in the first place. The dragons around him began to make sounds that Marcus realized was laughter. Deep, rumbling, decidedly amused laughter. Your father has the heart of a dragon, said a voice that belonged to a sleek purple dragon with silver markings. I can see where you 3 get your stubbornness. Emma's mental voice carried warmth and pride. That's what we learned out there, Dad. Humans don't give up. Ever. No matter how outmatched we are, no matter how impossible the odds seem, humans find a way to fight back. The Zephyrians call it the human anomaly, Michael added. Most species submit when faced with superior technology. Humans just get angry and start planning. Dr. Wright's massive head swung toward Marcus. The question is, what can we do here on Earth? Our dragon abilities are powerful, but the Zephyrians have orbital platforms, energy weapons, and ships that can travel between stars. Marcus looked up at the surveillance drones, then at the incredible creatures that had once been ordinary humans. An idea was forming in his mind, born from a lifetime of solving problems on the farm and 15 years of imagining his children's return. You said they're in phase 1, surveillance. They're learning about you, your capabilities, your numbers. That's right, Sarah confirmed. Then maybe it's time they learned something else about humans, Marcus said with a grin, something they probably haven't encountered before. What's that, Dad? Marcus looked around at the assembled dragons. These beings who had been transformed by alien science but who still carried human hearts and human determination. They're about to learn what happens when you threaten someone's family on their own home ground. You said humans are an anomaly because we don't give up. Well, there's something else about humans they probably don't know. He pointed toward the sky where the drones continued their patient surveillance. We're really, really good at making friends. The dragons around him began to stir with something that felt like anticipation. Marcus could see it in their ancient eyes. They were starting to understand what he was suggesting. Dad, Sarah said slowly, are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Marcus nodded toward the road that led to town, where the morning commute was beginning and where millions of humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their world was being watched by alien forces. It's time to let Earth know her children have come home. And it's time to show these Zephyrians what happens when they pick a fight with an entire planet. Within 3 hours, Marcus's quiet farm had become the center of something extraordinary. The first to arrive were the local news crews, drawn by reports of large aircraft landing in the wheat fields. They came expecting to find a small plane crash or maybe an elaborate hoax. Instead, they found 43 dragons lounging in the morning sun like cats in a garden. The reporter from Channel 7 News, a young woman named Jessica Mills, stood frozen beside her cameraman as a massive silver dragon with blue markings raised its head to look at her curiously. The camera was rolling, broadcasting live to the entire region. "This is Jessica Mills reporting from what can only be described as an impossible scene," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm standing in a wheat field outside Millbrook, surrounded by what appear to be actual living dragons." Marcus walked over to her, feeling oddly calm despite the chaos erupting around his property. "They're not just dragons," he said, loud enough for the camera to pick up. "They're humans, my children and dozens of others who were taken from Earth by aliens 15 years ago." The cameraman's hands were trembling, but he kept filming as Sarah transformed from her dragon form back into human shape. The change happened slowly enough for the camera to capture every detail: scales melting away, wings folding into nothingness, the massive body condensing down to human proportions. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said directly to the camera. 15 years ago, I was a college student studying environmental science. I was abducted by alien beings called Zephyrians, experimented on and transformed into what you see. We're not the only ones. There are thousands of humans scattered across the galaxy who have been taken from Earth. Jessica Mills, to her credit, managed to keep asking questions despite the shock. "How is this possible? How did you get back to Earth?" Michael transformed next, his black scales rippling away to reveal a man in his 30s with kind eyes and his father's stubborn expression. "We learned to use their own technology against them. We freed ourselves and others, and we've spent years fighting back against the Zephyrians, but now they've followed us home." He pointed to the sky where the surveillance drones continued their patient watch. "Those objects up there are Zephyrian surveillance drones. They're watching us right now, preparing for what comes next." The news coverage spread like wildfire. Within an hour, every major network had picked up the feed. Social media exploded with videos of dragons transforming into humans, and humans explaining impossible things in calm, matter-of-fact voices. The world was watching Millbrook, Kansas. By noon, the military had arrived. Black helicopters circled the property while ground vehicles set up a perimeter. Marcus watched from his porch as soldiers in full combat gear established checkpoints on all the roads leading to his farm. General Patricia Hayes, a stern woman with steel gray hair and decades of command experience, approached the porch with a small team of advisors. She looked up at the dragons scattered across the property, then at Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to need you and your family to come with us for debriefing." Marcus stood up slowly, feeling every one of his 67 years. "General, with respect, these people have been prisoners for 15 years. They just got home. They're not going anywhere unless it's voluntary." Sarah rose from where she had been sitting on the porch steps. "General Hayes, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm a United States citizen, as are most of the people here. We've committed no crimes. We're the victims of an alien abduction, and we've returned to warn Earth of a threat. A threat we need to understand," the general replied. "Those objects in the sky are Zephyrian surveillance drones," Dr. Wright interrupted, approaching in human form. His NASA credentials had already been verified through database searches. "I'm Dr. James Wright, former mission specialist with NASA. What we're dealing with here is a hostile alien intelligence with technology far beyond anything Earth has developed." The general's expression sharpened. "How far beyond?" Emma transformed and approached the group. "They can travel between stars in a matter of days. They have energy weapons that can destroy entire cities. Their ships are the size of Manhattan and can operate in space, atmosphere, or underwater with equal ease. And they're coming here," Michael added grimly. "The surveillance drones are preparation for a larger operation. Based on what we've seen before, they'll send a small fleet to capture or eliminate us. They consider us dangerous weapons." General Hayes looked around at the dragons, then back at the siblings. "Are you? Dangerous weapons?" Sarah's eyes flickered with something that might have been scales. "General, a single dragon in full combat mode can destroy a tank battalion. The 43 of us here could level a city if we wanted to. But we're not weapons. We're people who were changed against our will and who learned to use those changes to survive. The military presence continued to grow throughout the afternoon. Scientists arrived from various government agencies, eager to study the returned humans and their abilities. Representatives from the United Nations flew in to observe what was quickly being called the most significant event in human history. But Marcus noticed something else happening. Regular people were arriving too. Families who had lost members to unexplained disappearances over the years. Parents holding photos of missing children. Siblings searching for answers. Spouses who had never given up hope. An elderly woman named Margaret Sullivan approached the military checkpoint carrying a faded photograph. "My grandson disappeared 10 years ago," she told the soldiers. "He was camping in Colorado. Please, I just want to know if he's with them." Word spread through the crowd of onlookers, and soon dozens of families were sharing similar stories. Missing persons from across the country and around the world, all taken under mysterious circumstances that had been dismissed as runaways, accidents, or abductions by human criminals. Sarah noticed the crowd of families and spoke quietly to her fellow Earthborn. Several dragons took human form and approached the military perimeter. They spoke with the families, looking at photographs, sharing information about other humans they had encountered in their travels across the galaxy. Marcus watched his daughter comfort Margaret Sullivan, explaining that they had indeed rescued several humans from a Zephyrian facility near the Andromeda Galaxy, including a young man who matched the description of her grandson. He was alive, leading a group of freed prisoners on a distant world, working to build a safe haven for abduction survivors. "This is bigger than just us." "Dad," Emma said quietly, joining Marcus on the porch, "there are thousands of human families who deserve to know what happened to their loved ones." As the sun began to set, Dr. Wright approached with a tablet displaying what looked like energy readings. "The surveillance drones are transmitting data," he announced. Large data packets being sent in the direction of the outer solar system. Michael's expression darkened. "They're reporting to a command ship. The Zephyrians are here in our solar system." General Hayes overheard and immediately began issuing orders to her communications team. "I need contact with NORAD, the Pentagon, and every space tracking facility we have. If there are hostile alien vessels in our solar system, I want to know about them." Sarah looked up at the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "They'll be beyond your detection range. Zephyrian ships use cloaking technology that bends light and radio waves around them, but they're out there, probably near Jupiter or Saturn, using the gas giant's gravity wells to mask their approach." "How long do we have?" the general asked. The Earthborn exchanged glances, their enhanced senses apparently allowing them to communicate in ways the military couldn't detect. "Based on their previous operations," Dr. Wright said finally, "we estimate 72 hours before they make their move. The Zephyrians prefer to act when their target is isolated and cut off from potential allies." Marcus felt a chill of realization. They're waiting for the media attention to die down. They want the world to lose interest before they strike. "That's not going to happen," General Hayes said firmly. "This story is too big to bury. The entire world is watching." Sarah smiled grimly. "That's exactly what we're hoping for, General. Because when the Zephyrians come, they're not just coming for us anymore. They're coming for Earth. And for the first time in their history, they're going to find out what happens when you threaten a planet full of humans who know you're coming." Above them, the surveillance drones continued their patient watch, transmitting their reports to ships hidden in the darkness between worlds. But they were no longer just watching 43 escaped prisoners. They were watching a planet that was rapidly becoming aware of the threat approaching from the stars. The dragon family had come home, and Earth was waking up. The next morning brought revelations that changed everything. Dr. Wright stood before a hastily assembled group of world leaders, military officials and scientists, displaying holographic images that seemed to materialize from thin air. His dragon-enhanced abilities allowed him to interface directly with electronic systems in ways that amazed the assembled experts. "These are star charts we memorized during our time in Zephyrian custody," he explained, manipulating the three-dimensional display with gestures. "What you're seeing is the scope of their empire. Over 300 star systems under their control with populations numbering in the trillions." President Martinez, who had flown in overnight, leaned forward in her chair. "Dr. Wright, you're telling us we're facing an enemy that controls hundreds of worlds?" "Not just controls," Emma corrected, her young face bearing the weight of terrible knowledge. Harvests. The Zephyrians don't conquer in the traditional sense. They study species, extract what they consider useful, and either integrate the survivors into their empire or eliminate them entirely. General Hayes pulled up satellite imagery on her tablet. Our space tracking stations have confirmed anomalous readings in the outer solar system. Whatever's out there is big enough to affect gravitational sensors, but it's invisible to optical and radio detection. Marcus watched the proceedings from his kitchen, serving coffee to world leaders and alien-enhanced humans alike. The surreal nature of the situation hadn't quite sunk in. 3 days ago he had been a lonely farmer. Now his kitchen table was surrounded by people discussing interstellar war. Sarah approached him with a tablet displaying news feeds from around the world. "Dad, you need to see this." The global response had been unprecedented. Every major nation had mobilized their military forces. Scientists were sharing research data at speeds never before achieved. Most remarkably, ordinary people were organizing themselves into support networks and information-sharing groups. "Look at this." Sarah pointed to a news feed from Tokyo. Thousands of people had gathered in public squares, holding vigils for family members who had disappeared over the years. Similar gatherings were happening in London, New York, São Paulo, and dozens of other cities. The families of the missing, Marcus realized. They're connecting with each other. More than that, Michael said, joining the conversation. They're demanding action. Governments can't ignore this anymore. Every unexplained disappearance from the past 50 years is being re-examined with the possibility of alien involvement. Dr. Elizabeth Chang, a quantum physicist from MIT, approached their group. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask your family some questions about Zephyrian technology. We're trying to understand their capabilities so we can prepare some kind of defense." Emma nodded and gestured for Dr. Chang to sit down. "What do you want to know?" "Their ships, how do they achieve faster-than-light travel?" "They manipulate space-time itself," Emma explained, her 16-year-old appearance contrasting sharply with her advanced knowledge. "Imagine folding a piece of paper so two distant points touch. They create temporary folds in reality that allow them to step from one location to another instantly." Dr. Chang's eyes widened. "That's theoretically possible, but the energy requirements would be enormous." "They harvest energy from entire stars," Michael said matter-of-factly. "They build collection arrays around suns and drain their output over centuries. It's how they power their empire." The physicist sat back overwhelmed. "The technological gap is vast. How do we fight something like that?" Sarah smiled grimly. "The same way humans have always fought superior forces, Dr. Chang. We adapt, we improvise, and we refuse to quit." Outside, the surveillance drones had been joined by larger craft. Objects the size of school buses now hovered at high altitude, their presence detected only by the Dragon's enhanced senses. The Zephyrians were escalating their observation, preparing for the next phase of their operation. General Hayes received the update from Dr. Wright and immediately convened an emergency meeting. "If they're moving to Phase 2, we need to be ready. What can we expect?" "Isolation protocols," Dr. Wright replied. "They'll try to cut off communication between the target area and the outside world. Then they'll deploy capture teams." "How many ships are we talking about? For a retrieval operation like this?" "Probably a small fleet. 3 to 5 main vessels, maybe 30 smaller craft. Each main vessel carries about 1,000 Zephyrian soldiers and enough firepower to glass a continent." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were facing a force that could destroy entire continents, and Earth's most advanced weapons were barely more effective than throwing rocks. But Marcus noticed something in his children's expressions that gave him hope. They weren't afraid. If anything, they looked determined, even eager. "There's something you're not telling them," he said quietly to Sarah. She nodded. "The Zephyrians have one major weakness, Dad. Something they don't even realize because they've never encountered it before." "What's that?" "They've never fought dragons on their homeworld," Emma overheard and grinned. "Dad, remember what we told you about dragon abilities? We can manipulate energy, move through space, communicate telepathically across vast distances." "Yes, well, we didn't mention everything. When dragons fight together, really fight together, something happens. We become more than the sum of our parts," Michael nodded. "It's called a flight bond. When multiple dragons unite for a common cause, our abilities multiply exponentially. Not just add together, multiply. Dr. Wright looked up from his calculations. We tested it once when we were freeing a Zephyrian prison facility. 3 of us working together were able to manipulate the gravitational field of an entire moon. General Hayes looked skeptical. You're talking about 3 people affecting celestial mechanics? We're not just people anymore, General, Sarah explained. The Zephyrian experiments changed us at a fundamental level. We can access and manipulate forces that most species can't even detect. President Martinez leaned forward. Are you saying you can fight their ships? We're saying we can do more than fight them, Emma replied. We can turn their own technology against them. Every piece of Zephyrian equipment is designed to work with energy manipulation. They assume only they can use it. But dragons can manipulate energy too, Marcus realized. Exactly, and we've had 15 years to study their technology from the inside. The room buzzed with new energy as the implications became clear. This wasn't just a desperate last stand against impossible odds. The returned humans had brought back knowledge and abilities that could level the playing field. Dr. Chang was frantically taking notes. If you can manipulate their technology, could you disable their ships? Better than that, Dr. Wright said with a grin that showed slightly pointed teeth. We can capture them, turn their own fleet against any reinforcements they might call. General Hayes stood up, her expression shifting from grim resignation to tactical determination. Then we need to change our strategy. Instead of preparing for a hopeless defense, we're going to set a trap. Marcus felt pride swelling in his chest as he watched his children and their adopted family begin planning something that would have been pure fantasy a week ago. These weren't just victims anymore. They were warriors who had learned to use their transformation as a weapon against their captors. What do you need from us? President Martinez asked. Sarah looked around the room, then at her father. We need the world to know what's coming. When the Zephyrians arrive, they're expecting to find a primitive planet with no knowledge of their existence. Instead, they're going to find a world that's been preparing for them. More than that, Michael added, they're going to find a world full of humans who are absolutely furious about what was done to their people. Emma stood up, her young face set with determination that belonged on someone much older. The Zephyrians think humans are just another primitive species to be harvested and studied. They're about to learn why that's the biggest mistake they've ever made. Outside, the surveillance drones detected increased energy readings from the farm. What they couldn't detect was the network of telepathic communication, spreading outward from the Earthborn dragons, reaching toward other transformed humans scattered across the galaxy. The call was going out. The dragon family had returned home and they were gathering their true family, every human who had been taken, transformed and scattered among the stars. Earth's children were coming, home to defend their world. The Zephyrians had followed 43 escaped prisoners to Earth. They were about to face an entire planet of humans who had just learned their missing family. Members were still alive, still fighting, and coming home with the knowledge and power to win. The attack came at dawn on the 3rd day, just as the Earthborn had predicted. The Zephyrian fleet materialized in Earth's atmosphere like ghosts becoming solid, their cloaking fields dissolving to reveal 5 massive ships that dwarfed anything humans had ever built. Each vessel stretched nearly 2 miles in length, their crystalline hulls gleaming with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. Marcus stood on his porch, watching the impossible sight with a mixture of fear and determination. Around him, the 43 dragons had arranged themselves in a complex pattern across his property, their forms shifting between human and dragon as they prepared for battle. The largest Zephyrian ship positioned itself directly above the farm, casting a shadow that plunged the entire area into artificial twilight. A beam of energy descended from its hull, scanning the gathered dragons with visible light that danced across their scales like aurora. They're trying to lock onto us for transport, Sarah explained, her voice calm despite the enormous threat hovering overhead. Standard Zephyrian capture protocol. General Hayes, who had positioned herself and her command team in a reinforced bunker a mile away, spoke through the communication system. All military units are in position. We have every missile defense system on the continent aimed at those ships. Hold your fire, Dr. Wright commanded. Human weapons won't penetrate their shields, and attacking now will only force them to use lethal force. Through the open channels, they could hear similar conversations happening around the world. Every major military was tracking the Zephyrian ships, but the returned humans had convinced world leaders to wait for the signal before engaging. A new voice crackled through the communications. Cold, mechanical, speaking English with perfect pronunciation but no emotion. Escaped experimental subjects you will surrender immediately for return to designated research facilities. Resistance will result in termination. Emma laughed, a sound that carried both human amusement and dragon defiance. Same old Zephyrians. They always assume everyone will just give up. Escaped subjects, the voice continued. You have compromised classified research by revealing your existence to this primitive population. The contamination must be eliminated. Marcus felt ice in his veins as he realized what that meant. The Zephyrians weren't just here to recapture his children. They were planning to eliminate every human who now knew about their existence. Potentially the entire population of Earth. Now would be good, Sarah said quietly. Michael raised his head toward the ship above them. We are no longer your subjects, he called out, his voice somehow carrying clearly to the alien vessel. We are Earth's children and we have come home to protect our world. The response was immediate. Energy beams lanced down from all 5 ships simultaneously, brilliant columns of destructive force that should have vaporized everything they touched. But as the beam struck the dragons, something extraordinary happened. The energy didn't destroy them. It was absorbed, flowing into their scales like water soaking into dry earth. The dragons began to glow with increasing intensity as they channeled the alien power into themselves. Impossible, the mechanical voice stated. Energy absorption at this level exceeds all recorded parameters. Dr. Wright's dragon form, massive and bronze-scaled, raised its head toward the ship. You made a mistake 15 years ago. You gave us the ability to manipulate energy, but you never considered what would happen if we learned to work together. The 43 dragons began to move, their positions shifting into a pattern that Marcus recognized as some kind of formation. As they moved, the absorbed energy began to flow between them, creating visible connections of power that formed a network across the entire farm. Flight bond initiated, Emma announced, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. All units prepare for unified response. What happened next defied every law of physics Marcus thought he knew. The energy network connecting the dragons suddenly expanded, reaching beyond the farm, beyond the state, spreading across the entire continent in seconds. Every piece of electronic equipment within the network's range, satellites, power grids, communication systems, military installations, suddenly began operating at peak efficiency. What are you doing? General Hayes demanded through the communication system. Showing them what humans do when we work together, Sarah replied. Her dragon form was growing larger, fed by the energy flowing through the network. All the dragons were growing, becoming more than they had been individually. The Zephyrian ships began to retreat, their confidence shaken by phenomena they had never encountered before. But it was too late. The energy network had connected to every human-made satellite in orbit, and through those satellites, to similar networks being established by other groups of returned humans on every continent. Phase 1, Michael announced. Global communication grid established. Marcus watched in amazement as holographic displays began appearing in the air above the farm, showing similar scenes from around the world. Dragons were emerging from hiding in every major city, each group creating their own energy networks and connecting to the global system. The mechanical voice from the ship above became agitated. Unknown technology detected. This primitive species should not possess such capabilities. Phase 2, Dr. Wright announced. Network expansion to orbital systems. The energy network suddenly leaped skyward, connecting to every piece of human technology in space. Satellites that had been operating for decades suddenly began broadcasting with power levels that should have been impossible. The International Space Station, empty of crew for this operation, lit up like a beacon as its systems were supercharged by dragon energy. But more importantly, the network began to affect Zephyrian technology as well. The cloaking fields around their ships flickered as the energy patterns they relied on were disrupted by the expanding human network. Shields failing, the voice reported, now with an edge of something that might have been concern. Energy drain exceeding compensation capabilities. Phase 3, Emma said, her mental voice now reaching every human on Earth through the network. Show them what we learned. Across the globe, every television, radio, and internet connection suddenly displayed the same images. recordings the returned humans had made during their time in Zephyrian custody. The world watched as their missing family members were experimented on, transformed, and tortured. They saw the scope of the Zephyrian Empire, the thousands of worlds under their control, and the millions of beings held in captivity. But they also saw something else. They saw humans learning, adapting, growing stronger despite their captivity. They saw prisoners becoming warriors, victims becoming leaders, and a scattered group of abductees becoming a force that could challenge an interstellar empire. The entire population is now aware of our presence, the Zephyrian voice stated. Sterilization protocols must be initiated immediately. The 5 ships began to glow with increasing intensity, their weapons systems charging for what Marcus realized would be attacks capable of destroying cities. Phase 4, Sarah announced. Time to come home. The energy network that had spread across Earth suddenly reached beyond the planet, extending into space at faster-than-light speeds. Within seconds, it had connected to similar networks around dozens of other worlds throughout the galaxy. And through those connections came answers to the call that had gone out days earlier. Ships began appearing in Earth's orbit. Not Zephyrian vessels, but craft built by freed prisoners and resistance movements from across the galaxy. Humans who had been scattered among the stars were returning home, bringing with them allies from other species who had suffered under Zephyrian rule. The sky above Earth filled with hundreds of ships representing dozens of different species, all united by their shared experience of captivity and their determination to end Zephyrian expansion. Marcus looked up at the massive alien ship that still hovered above his farm, then at his children who had grown from captured victims into leaders of an interstellar resistance movement. Not so primitive anymore, are we? He called up to the ship. The Zephyrian vessel's weapons powered down as its crew realized they were now vastly outnumbered by an alliance they had never imagined possible. Surrender now, Dr. Wright's voice boomed across the communication channels. And we'll discuss terms. Continue to threaten Earth and you'll discover what happens when you unite every species in the galaxy against you. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Zephyrians found themselves facing an opponent that was stronger, more numerous, and far more determined than they were. Earth's children had come home, and they had brought friends. The negotiation that followed would be remembered as the most important diplomatic event in galactic history. The Zephyrian command ship hovered, motionless above Marcus's farm while representatives from over 50 different species gathered in what had once been a simple wheat field. Marcus found himself hosting beings that looked like they belonged in science fiction movies. There were crystalline entities that communicated through light patterns, aquatic species that required special environmental suits, and humanoids with features so alien they barely seemed real. Yet each delegation was led by humans, former abductees who had become leaders of liberation movements across the galaxy. The irony is incredible, Dr. Wright observed, as he helped Marcus serve coffee to a delegation of insectoid beings from the Andromeda galaxy. The Zephyrians thought they were harvesting primitive specimens. Instead, they spread humans throughout the galaxy and accidentally created the alliance that would bring them down. Sarah approached her father with a datapad displaying communication logs from around the galaxy. Dad, you need to see this. We're getting reports from Zephyrian-controlled systems throughout their empire. Local resistance movements are rising up everywhere. Word of what happened here has spread faster than their ability to contain it. The leader of the Zephyrian delegation, a tall gray being with large black eyes and an expression of barely concealed frustration, stood before the assembled representatives. When it spoke, its voice carried the mechanical precision that Marcus had learned to hate. This action violates all established protocols for primitive species contact. The contamination of your population with advanced knowledge will destabilize your social development. Emma, still appearing to be 16 despite her ancient wisdom, laughed openly. Destabilize our development? You've been abducting our people for over 50 years. You've experimented on us, tortured us, and scattered us across the galaxy. If anyone has destabilized human development, it's you. A new voice joined the conversation, Dr. Chen Yamazaki, a Japanese astrophysicist who had been taken 20 years earlier and now led a coalition of freed prisoners in the Vega system. The Zephyrian Empire is built on a false premise. You believe that advanced civilizations must control less developed ones for their own good. But you've never considered what happens when those primitive species prove to be more adaptable than you are. The Zephyrian representative's expression didn't change, but its body language suggested agitation. Humans are an anomaly. Most species integrate peacefully into our empire once they understand the benefits of our guidance. Or they're too terrified to resist after you demonstrate your power, Michael said coldly. We've seen your integration facilities. Entire populations reduced to slave labor. Their cultures destroyed. Their children taken for experimentation. Marcus watched his son speak with authority about horrors that should never have existed and felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. His children had grown into leaders, but the cost had been enormous. General Hayes approached the group with a tablet displaying global communications data. Mr. Chen, you should know that every major government on Earth has ratified the Alliance Accords. Humanity is officially joining the Galactic Resistance movement. The Accords had been drafted overnight by a team of human lawyers, working with former prisoners who had legal training from dozens of different worlds. It was a document that established Earth as a sovereign world and committed humanity to the liberation of all Zephyrian-controlled territories. This is unprecedented, the Zephyrian delegate stated. A primitive world cannot simply declare independence from galactic authority. Dr. Wright's laugh carried distinctly dragon-like harmonics. Watch us. The demonstration that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The energy network that connected the dragons expanded once again, this time reaching every piece of technology on Earth. Cars, computers, smartphones, satellites. Everything connected to the network and began operating with impossible efficiency. But the real shock came when the network extended to the Zephyrian ships themselves. Despite their advanced shielding and security systems, the dragon-enhanced humans began to interface directly with alien technology. How are you doing this? The Zephyrian demanded as systems throughout its ship began responding to external commands. You taught us, Emma replied simply. When you transformed us into dragons, you gave us the ability to manipulate energy at a quantum level. Every piece of technology in the universe operates on energy. We can interface with anything you've built. To demonstrate her point, she gestured toward the command ship. Its external lights began flashing in patterns that spelled out, Earth says hello in a dozen different galactic languages. The psychological impact was devastating. The Zephyrians had built their empire on technological superiority, but now they faced an opponent who could turn their own technology against them at will. Reports began streaming in from across the galaxy. Zephyrian facilities were going offline as local resistance movements, suddenly able to interface with alien technology through the expanding network, took control of ships, communication arrays, and defense systems. Your empire is collapsing, Sarah told the delegate matter-of-factly. Right now, freed prisoners on 300 worlds are taking control of Zephyrian installations. Your choice is simple. Negotiate a peaceful transition, or watch everything you've built crumble around you. The delegate was silent for a long moment, clearly receiving communications from the rapidly failing empire. When it finally spoke, the mechanical precision was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. What are your terms? Dr. Wright stepped forward, his expression grim but determined. Immediate cessation of all abduction activities. Complete evacuation of occupied worlds. Release of all prisoners held in research facilities. Reparations to affected species. And formal recognition of the Galactic Liberation Alliance as the legitimate government of freed territories. These terms are impossible. The economic disruption alone is your problem, not ours, Michael interrupted. You built an empire on slavery and exploitation. The fact that it's not economically viable without those things is something you should have considered before you started kidnapping people. Marcus watched the proceedings with a sense of surreal pride. His children, who had been victims of an unimaginable crime, were now dictating terms to an interstellar empire. They had turned their transformation from tragedy into triumph. The negotiations continued for hours, with representatives from dozens of species contributing to what would become known as the Millbrook Accords. The document established new principles for galactic civilization based on consent, cooperation, and mutual respect rather than conquest and exploitation. As the sun set over the wheat fields that had become the center of galactic politics, Marcus sat on his porch with Sarah, Michael, and Emma. Around them, beings from across the galaxy worked together to build a framework for peace. Are you proud of us, Dad? Emma asked quietly. Marcus looked at his youngest daughter, who had endured horrors he couldn't imagine and emerged as a leader capable of reshaping galactic civilization. "Proud doesn't begin to cover it," he said. "You've all become something amazing." "We had a good example," Sarah said, leaning against her father. "You taught us that family means never giving up on each other, no matter how far apart we are or how impossible the situation seems." Michael nodded toward the gathered representatives. "Every human out there, every freed prisoner, every resistance leader, they're all fighting for the same thing you never stopped believing in. The idea that families belong together." As if summoned by his words, a new ship appeared in the sky above the farm. This one was smaller than the others, clearly built for speed rather than combat. It landed gently in the wheat field, and its door opened to reveal a young man with familiar features. Margaret Sullivan's grandson stepped out of the ship, followed by dozens of other humans who had been rescued from Zephyrian facilities across the galaxy. Behind them came beings from other species, all former prisoners who had chosen to make the journey to Earth for this historic moment. The reunion that followed was repeated thousands of times across the planet as families that had been separated for decades were finally brought back together. The Zephyrians watched in growing horror as they realized the true scope of what they had lost. Not just an empire, but any possibility of maintaining control over species that now understood their true strength. "Phase 5, Sarah said quietly, watching families embrace under the alien stars, bringing everyone home. Marcus smiled as he watched his granddaughter, a child he had never known existed, run toward him across the wheat field. The dragon family had returned home, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy what humans were truly capable of when they fought for their families. The Zephyrian Empire was ending, not with conquest or destruction, but with the simple human truth that families belong together. 5 years later, Marcus Chen stood in the same wheat field where everything had changed, but the view was dramatically different. Where once there had been simple farmland, now stood the Earth Diplomatic Center, a complex of buildings that served as the headquarters for the Galactic Liberation Alliance. The wheat still grew, but it shared space with landing pads for ships from hundreds of different worlds. His morning coffee was interrupted by the sound of dragon wings as his family arrived for their weekly gathering. Sarah landed first, her scales now bearing silver markings that indicated her rank as the Alliance's chief diplomatic officer. Michael followed, his black and red pattern enhanced by the gold insignia of the Military Coordination Council. Emma, still appearing young but now recognized as one of the galaxy's foremost experts on interspecies psychology, completed the family circle. "How are the integration programs going?" Marcus asked as they settled on the expanded porch that now accommodated beings of various sizes and shapes. "Better than expected," Sarah replied, accepting a cup of coffee with hands that occasionally flickered with scales. "We've successfully relocated over 3 million Zephyrians to designated worlds where they can rebuild their society without the empire structure. Most of them are adapting well to the concept of cooperation rather than domination. The rehabilitation centers are working too," Emma added. "Former Zephyrian soldiers are being retrained as peacekeepers and researchers. It turns out they're quite capable of positive contributions once you remove the imperial conditioning." Marcus nodded, remembering the difficult early days when the question of what to do with millions of former oppressors had nearly torn the Alliance apart. It had been Emma who proposed the rehabilitation approach, arguing that punishment without the possibility of redemption would just create new cycles of violence. Dr. Wright approached the porch, his human form showing the slight modifications that all the Earthborn had developed over the years. Extended lifespans, enhanced cognitive abilities, and a deeper connection to the energy networks that now linked inhabited worlds across the galaxy. "Morning briefing," he announced, producing a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. "I have updates from the Reconstruction Council." The map was dotted with different colored indicators. Green showed worlds that had successfully transitioned to Alliance membership. Yellow indicated worlds still working through the integration process. Red marked areas where former Zephyrian hardliners had established holdout territories. "The red zones are shrinking," Michael observed with satisfaction. "Only 12 holdout systems left, down from over 50 last year. And none of them are taking aggressive action," Dr. Wright confirmed. "They're mostly isolated groups trying to maintain the old imperial structure in miniature." The economic pressures are forcing them to negotiate. Marcus studied the map, marveling at how much had changed. The Zephyrian Empire had controlled over 300 star systems at its peak. Now all but a tiny fraction had joined the Alliance or declared independence with Alliance support. "What about the Earth integration programs?" he asked. Sarah smiled. "Dad, you're not going to believe the latest numbers. Over 90% of abduction survivors have chosen to return to Earth at least part-time. We've had to build 6 new cities just to accommodate everyone." The return of Earth's missing children had been one of the most remarkable aspects of the transition. Humans who had been scattered across the galaxy for decades came home bringing knowledge, technology, and alien spouses from dozens of different species. Earth had become the most cosmopolitan world in the galaxy almost overnight. "The cultural exchange programs are beyond successful," Emma reported. "We've got universities from 50 different worlds sending students to Earth, and Earth universities are establishing campuses throughout the galaxy. The knowledge sharing is accelerating technological development everywhere." Marcus smiled as he remembered the early fears that Earth would be overwhelmed by advanced alien technology. Instead, humans had proven remarkably adept at integrating new concepts with their existing knowledge base, often finding solutions that neither species could have developed alone. A new arrival interrupted their conversation. A sleek ship landed on the nearby pad, and out stepped a familiar figure, the former Zephyrian delegate who had negotiated the Millbrook Accords. The being had undergone significant changes over the past 5 years, its gray skin now showing faint patterns of color that indicated emotional states. "Administrator Zekton," Sarah greeted warmly. "You're early for the council meeting." The former Zephyrian, who now served as the Alliance's integration coordinator, approached the porch with the careful movements of someone still adjusting to a less formal social structure. "I wish to speak with Marcus Chen before the formal session," Zekton said, its voice now carrying emotional inflections rather than mechanical precision. "Today marks exactly 5 years since the events that changed everything." Marcus stood up, still amazed that he was on casual speaking terms with a being who had once represented an interstellar empire. "What can I do for you, Zekton?" "I wanted to express something that Zephyrians rarely discussed in our Imperial days," the alien said carefully. "Gratitude and apology." The words hung in the air for a moment. Zephyrians had been conditioned for millennia to view themselves as superior to other species, incapable of error or wrongdoing. For one to express both gratitude and apology represented a fundamental shift in their entire worldview. "You don't need to apologize to me," Marcus said gently. "I wasn't the one who was taken and experimented on. But you were the one who taught us what we had truly lost," Zekton replied. "When I watched you reunite with your children, when I saw the joy and love in that moment, I began to understand what we had destroyed across the galaxy. Millions of families, billions of individual lives, countless possibilities for growth and connection." Emma stood up and approached the former enemy. "Zekton, you've spent 5 years working to make amends. You've helped us locate and free thousands of prisoners. You've convinced entire Zephyrian colonies to join the Alliance peacefully. The past can't be changed, but you're building a better future. Your species has a concept that we are still learning," Zekton said. "Forgiveness. The idea that past wrongs can be acknowledged without preventing future cooperation. It is difficult for us to accept." "That's what makes it meaningful," Marcus replied. "Easy forgiveness isn't worth much. It's the hard forgiveness, the kind that requires real change, that builds lasting peace." Dr. Wright checked his chronometer. "We should head to the council meeting. Today's agenda includes the proposal for expanding the Alliance to the Magellanic Clouds." As they walked toward the main conference building, Marcus reflected on how much his world had changed. The building itself was a marvel of interspecies cooperation, designed by architects from a dozen different worlds to accommodate the needs of hundreds of different species. Inside, the main conference hall buzzed with activity as representatives from across the galaxy prepared for the session. Marcus recognized many faces, former prisoners who had become leaders, Zephyrian reformers working to rebuild their society, and beings from species that had been contacted for the first time as the Alliance expanded. President Martinez, now serving her second term as Earth's representative to the Alliance Council, approached their group. "Marcus, I'm glad you're here. The Council is planning to officially designate this site as a galactic heritage location. the place where the Age of Empire ended and the Age of Alliance began. Marcus looked around at the bustling activity, the casual interaction between species that had been enemies just years before, the children of various species playing together in the corridors. "I'm honored, but I think you're giving too much credit to an old farmer." "Dad," Sarah said, putting an arm around his shoulders, "you did something that changed the galaxy. When the Zephyrians came for us, you didn't just try to protect your family. You found a way to protect everyone's family." The formal session began with reports from across the galaxy. Former Zephyrian worlds were thriving under Alliance guidance. New technologies developed through interspecies cooperation were solving problems that had plagued civilizations for millennia. Most importantly, the discovery and liberation of hundreds of isolated species had proven that the galaxy was far more diverse and wonderful than anyone had imagined. But for Marcus, the most meaningful moment came at the end of the session when the newest members of the Alliance were formally welcomed. A delegation from the Magellanic Clouds, representing species that had never had contact with the main galaxy, stood to address the assembly. Their leader, a being that looked like it was made of living crystal, spoke through a translation device that had been developed by human and Zephyrian scientists working together. "We have heard the story of this alliance's founding," the crystal being said, its words creating harmonics that resonated throughout the hall. "We understand that it began when a family was reunited after years of separation. This gives us hope that our scattered people, lost across the void between galaxies, might also find their way home."